So previously we started the chapter periodic table, जिसके अंदर we discussed about what are periods, what are groups. Periods tell us the number of shells, group tell us the number of valence electrons. फिर आपको different energy levels का पता लगता है. How can you identify elements by looking at the electronic configuration? Then we saw कि how do we write those electronic configuration उन notations को identify करके how can you identify the period number, the group number, and we also did some practice in the class. I guess the revision has also dropped off. Other than that, we also talked about how by looking at the scientific notations, we can judge the element and its position in the periodic table, कि वो किस period में है, किस group में है, whether it's a noble gas or it's not a noble gas. Also, we talked about whether it is a stable or it's a unstable. अगर वो complete है तो it's stable. If it's incomplete outer shell तो वो unstable है. And these were the basics that we discussed about periodic table. Lekin if you look at the periodic table carefully, okay, we have a group known as metals and then we have a group known as non-metals as well. Okay, first you can see, for example, group 1, 2 or 3 जो आपके पास होते हैं, they are basically metals. फिर जो group 4 से onwards होते हैं, they are non-metals. बीच में आपके पास transition metals भी आते हैं. So today we'll be talking about classifying metals and classifying non-metals. Now, if you look at the characteristic properties of metals and non-metals, now we know that the electron arrangement, I told you that metals are from group 1 to 3 and non-metals are from group 4 to 7. Matlab, if you look at the periodic table over here, group 1, group 2 and group 3, ये आपके पास metals हैं, and जो आपके पास non-metals in that consists group 4, 5, 6, 7 and 0, or what we call as group number 8. Now, group number 4 to 8 are non-metals. Or group 1 to 3 and they are basically your metals. In between we also have these known as transition elements, or we also call them transition metals. Ye bhi metals hi hain, but they vary with the properties with the normal metals. Normal or transition metals mein kuch differences bhi hote hain. Now if we look at the normal and basic classification and the differences between metals and non-metals, first of all, metals lie in group 1 to 3 and more in periods 5 and 6. Outer shell electrons, non-metals जो हैं वो 4 to 7 electrons in the outermost shell. 4 to 7 electrons in the valence shell का मतलब क्या है? That their group number is also 4, 5, 6 and 7. तो वो group 4 to 7 से लेके जो हैं वो non-metals हैं, and group 1 to 3 they are your metals. If we talk about bonding, metals have metallic bonding due to the loss of outer shell electrons. When metals lose electron, only then they can complete their outermost shell. For example, अगर मैं कहूँ, if I have a metal sodium, sodium का electronic configuration is 281 because sodium का जो proton number होता है वो 11 होता है, mass number 23. 11 protons का मतलब उसके पास 11 electrons हैं. Now I have an example of sodium. Now sodium has a proton number of 11, which means it's having 11 electrons. So we know the first shell contains maximum of 2 electrons. Okay. The second shell that contains the maximum of 8 electrons, and the third shell would then also can contain maximum of 8 electrons. So हमारे पास 1 बचा. 2 plus 8 plus 1, is it 11? Yes, it is. So हमने 11 electrons को कैसे fill किए? In the first one we have 2, second में 8 और third में 1. Now metals can only complete their shell when they lose electron. तो अभी अगर हम देखें, is the outermost shell of sodium complete? No. Third shell में maximum कितने आते हैं? तो आपका third shell होता है, उसके अंदर maximum 8 पा सकते हैं. But in the third shell we have only 1. How many more do we need? We need 7 more electrons. But what is an easy way? What if we just remove this electron? अगर हम इस electron को ही remove कर दें, if we just lose the electron, if the metal just loses the electron, अगर हम इस electron को उठा के remove करते हैं, क्योंकि किसी से just imagine if you have 2 people, ठीक है, one of them is having 1 ball and one of them is having 9 balls. Both of you have to complete a set of 10 balls. What is the easy way? Can you give him your 1 ball so he can complete his 10 balls, or should he give his 9 balls to you ताकि आप अपना complete करें? The easy way is that why don't you help him? Because his work is already done. उसके पास already 9 balls हैं, उसको 10 complete करने के लिए only need 1 more. You to complete 10 balls, you need 9 more. So what's the easy way? You can just lose 1 electron. So अगर हम एक electron ही lose कर दें, now which is the outermost shell? Is the third shell the outermost shell? No. ये तो खत्म हो गया. Is the second shell the outermost electron? Yes. The outermost electron के अंदर we now have 8 electrons and the second outermost shell is now complete. Just a second. So always remember कि जो metals होते हैं, metals always complete their outermost shell by losing electrons, whereas non-metals have covalent bonding. Covalent होती है between non-metals by sharing of outer shell electrons. अब हमेशा जब भी आपके पास non-metals होते हैं वो अपना outermost shell करते हैं by gaining electrons, जबकि metals complete their outermost shell by losing electrons. Moreover, metals are good conductors of electricity, whereas non-metals are poor conductors of electricity. Type of oxides की बात करें, metals form basic oxide. A few of them are amphoteric, such as Al2O3. वो हम acid bases and salts में भी cover करेंगे. And non-metals form acidic oxides, and in those some of them are actually neutral. अगर हम reaction with acids की बात करें, many metals react with acids and non-metals do not react with acids. Physical characteristics में देखें तो metals are malleable, they can be bent, they can be changed with shape, they have a high melting and boiling point. Whereas जो non-metals and they are brittle. मतलब अगर आप इनको तोड़ेंगे, you cannot bend them. If you try to bend them, they are going to break. And they are also flaky and have low melting and boiling points. Metals and non-metals in the periodic table. Now the location of the metals and non-metals show a clear pattern when highlighted on a periodic table. Another thing that is striking is that you can see the vast majority of elements are metals. Now if you look at this, आपको जो blue वाले हैं, the blue ones are indicating your metals, whereas the purple ones are, and the yellow ones, the purple and yellow ones are indicating non-metals. और आपको जो blue one है, they are actually your metals. So we can see here कि आपके पास जो ये हैं, these are your non-metals. Then group number 1 and 2, और फिर ये वाला 3 और ये, these are your metals. And in between we have transition metals as well. This is how you identify them on the periodic table. और बाकी we know how to write a scientific notation. For example, if I want to write the scientific notation of potassium, its proton number है 19 and its mass number is 39. This is how we write the scientific notation. Electronic configuration and reactivity. Similar chemical properties. Now chemical properties of elements in the same group. अगर हम एक same group को देखें, if we look at one group, how do all the elements vary in that one single group? Elements in the same group in the periodic table will have similar chemical properties. For example, all elements in group 1, ठीक है, अगर हम periodic table को देखें, all elements in group 1, for example, lithium, sodium, potassium, rubidium, cesium and francium, all of these group 1 elements, they are in the same group. वो कौन सा group है? Group number 1. So all group 1 elements would be having the same chemical properties, whereas fluorine, chlorine, bromine, iodine and astatine being in a different group but being in the same group, fluorine, chlorine, bromine, iodine, astatine would be having similar properties, similar chemical properties due to being in the same group number 7. But अगर मैं कहूँ कि what about calcium and phosphorus? Now they both have different groups. Calcium is in group number 2 and phosphorus is in group number 5. Now both of them would be having a different chemical property because they are not in the same group. So obviously that varies. So elements in the same group in the periodic table will have similar chemical properties. Why? This is because they have the same number of outer electrons, so will react and bond similarly. Because bonding में एक चीज जो important होती है, we'll be doing this in the next chapter. When we talk about bonding, the most important thing is the valence electrons. The valence electrons have a key role in bonding, determining the type of bonding and the number of bonds to be determined between the compound is all dependent on the outermost shell electrons. तो आपके पास जो valence electrons होते हैं, only they are very important and playing a key role when we talk about bonding. Now, अगर मैं कहूँ, why do they all have similar chemical properties in one group? Because in group 1 elements, all elements have only one outermost electron in their outermost shell. उनके पास सबके पास एक इलेक्ट्रॉन है. Group 7 की बात करूँ, all of them have same chemical properties because all of them perform the same type of bonding because all of them have 7 electrons in their outermost shell. Group number 3 की, all elements in group number 3 would have similar chemical properties because all elements in group number 3 have 3 electrons in their outermost shell. Now, the group number of an element, which is given on the periodic table, indicates the number of electrons in the outer shell, which are also known as the valence electron that we also discussed before. Obviously, जो group number होता है element का periodic table के ऊपर वही indicate करता है कि how many are the number of electrons present in the outermost shell, and we call them valence electron. Now, this rule holds true for all elements except helium. Although it is in group 0, but it has only one shell, the first and innermost shell, which holds only 2 electrons. अब helium जो है, helium is an exception. Helium का mass number 4 होता है, proton number is 2, which means it has 2 electrons. Now it's only first, इसका तो एक ही shell होगा, तो first shell ही complete होता है. This is the electronic configuration of helium, having 2 electrons, and the first shell is also complete. जो उसका innermost shell and the outermost shell is the same, क्योंकि it only has one shell, so obviously that is complete. We can also use the group number to predict how elements will react, as the number of valence shell electrons in an element influences how the element actually reacts. Therefore, elements in the same group react similarly. By observing the reaction of one element from a group, you can predict how the other elements in that group will react. Because I told you, they all have similar chemical properties. Why do they have similar chemical properties? The examiner can ask this question in your Edexcel Chemistry IGCSE exam, that why do for example, why do chlorine and bromine share similar chemical properties? The reason is because they have the same number of electrons in the outermost shell. उनके जो outermost shell electrons हैं, they are both 7. Both have 7 electrons in their outermost shell. They have same chemical properties. इसीलिए they would perform the same type of covalent bonding, and they would also react similarly. उनके जो reactions होंगे, they would also react similarly. थोड़ा बहुत difference reactivity में आ जाएगा, but they would both react in a kind of a similar way. By observing the reaction of one element from a group, अगर आपको fluorine का reaction पता है, if you know the reaction of fluorine, obviously all the other elements in the same group would be reacting similarly to that of fluorine. Chlorine, bromine, iodine, astatine, all other 4 would be similar to that of fluorine. Even if you know the reaction of one element, you can determine the type of reactions of all the other elements in the same group. You can just predict how the other elements in that group will actually react. By reacting 2 or more elements from the same group and observing what happens in those reactions, you can make predictions about reactivity, and you can also establish trends in reactivity in that group. For example, lithium, sodium, and potassium, all of them are in group number 1. Lithium भी group 1 में है, sodium भी group 1 में है, potassium भी group 1 में है. They are all three of these are in group 1 and can all react with elements in group 7 to form an ionic compound. कैसे? For example, we'll be doing this in bonding chapter. लेकिन अगर मैं sodium की बात करूं, sodium has 1 electron in its outermost shell. Chlorine जो है, chlorine has 7 electrons in its outermost shell because it is in group number 7. Now both of them want to complete their outermost shell. Either chlorine can give 7 electrons to sodium, or sodium can give 1 electron to chlorine. So what's the easier way? The easy way is that sodium just gives 1 electron to chlorine ताकि इसका shell खत्म हो जाए, and the next innermost shell inside the sodium would be complete, जो उसका 288 वाला था, और साथ ही आपको क्लोरीन का भी complete हो जाएगा. By losing 1 electron, sodium has a +1 charge, and by gaining electron, chlorine has a -1 charge. So this is how chlorine and sodium react together and form the ionic compound sodium chloride salt, जिसको हम NaCl commonly कहते हैं. We'll be doing this in the chemical bonding chapter, no need to worry. So that is why they're saying lithium, sodium, potassium, all of them are in group number 1, and they can all react with elements in group number 7 to form an ionic compound. उनका जो reaction way होगा, the way they all react would be same as the other elements in the same group, because they all have similar electrons, they are all in the same group, and they all share similar chemical properties. The group 1 metals become more reactive as you move down the group, while the group 7 metals show a decrease in reactivity moving down the group. अब इनके ट्रेंड्स में कुछ फर्क है about reactivity. Now the trends differ. If I tell you कि trends किस तरह differ करते हैं, when we talk about group number 1, if I talk about group 1, and if I talk about group number 7, group number 7 or group number 1 के जो reactivity trends, and they are both different. The group 1 metals become more reactive as you move down the group, while the group 7 metals show a decrease in reactivity moving down the group. क्या मतलब है इसका? That if I talk about group 1 and if I talk about group 7, ठीक है, इन दोनों में क्या फर्क है? अगर मैं ग्रुप 1 के एलिमेंट्स लिखूं, लिथियम, सोडियम, पोटेशियम, रुबीडियम, ठीक है, और अगर मैं ग्रुप 7 के लिखूं फॉर एग्जांपल FCl, Br and I. Now the difference in the trends is that group 1 metals become more reactive when you move down the group. जो आप move down the group करते हैं, when you come down the group from lithium to rubidium, their reactivity increases. But when we talk about group 7, as they move down the group, their reactivity decreases. What does this mean? क्योंकि अगर मैं group 1 की बात करूं, when I talk about group 1, obviously अगर मैं lithium को compare करूं rubidium से, we know that as we move down the group, reactivity increases, which means rubidium is more reactive, lithium is less reactive. But in the similar way, when I talk about group number 7, and if I compare, for example, chlorine and bromine, अगर मैं chlorine and bromine को compare करता हूँ, and I know the trend that as I move down the group, the reactivity trend is the opposite. The reactivity decreases in group number 7. So which one of these would be more reactive? Obviously, reactivity decreases down the group. So आपको bromine जो है that would be less reactive, chlorine would be most reactive. So group number 7 और group number 1 जो दोनों है, group number 1 and group number 7, both of they differ when we talk about their reactivity trends. Both of their reactivity trends are different from each other. क्या trends हैं? It is not always the same कि आप जब भी down the group जाएं increase ही होगा या up the group जाएं decrease. No, it's different. When we talk about group number 1, reactivity increases down the group. When we talk about group number 7, reactivity decreases down the group. Group 1 में increase होती है, group 7 में decrease होती है. This is a very important point that you have to remember. So group 1 metals become more reactive as you move down the group, while the group 7 metals show a decrease in reactivity moving down the group. Next हमारे पास एक चीज आती है that why noble gases are unreactive. Noble gases कौन सी हैं? The one which are known as group 8 or group 0. The word noble, जी term है noble gases की, इसका क्या मतलब होता है? Noble means inert, unreactive, noble, alone, ठीक है. The elements in group 0 or group 8 of the periodic table are called the noble gases, जिसके अंदर argon, krypton, neon ये सारी आती हैं. They are all non-metals and monatomic. Monatomic क्या होती है? For example, neon is a gas. Neon exists alone, मतलब Ne2 नहीं है. Neon gas would exist alone. But if I compare it to an element of group number 7, for example, bromine, bromine gas would always be diatomic. जो group 7 के elements होते हैं, they are all diatomic. Diatomic का क्या मतलब होता है? They have 2 atoms. ये आपके पास diatomic होते हैं. Whereas जो neon है, that is monatomic. जो आपके पास group 8 है, they are all monatomic. Group 7 जो होते हैं, they are diatomic. The elements in group 0 of the periodic table are called the noble gases. They are all non-metals. As you know कि non-metals जो होते हैं, they are from group number 4 to group number 8. They are all non-metals. Also, they are monatomic, exist as single atoms. For example, neon हो गया, alone, argon, alone, krypton, alone. ये सारे क्या हैं? ये अकेले हैं, ठीक है. They do not exist as two. For example, fluorine जो है F2 है, chlorine Cl2 है, bromine Br2. They are all group 7 halogens. We call group 7 ones halogens. They are all non-metals, monatomic, exist as single atoms. Also, all noble gases are colorless. Whereas जो group 7 halogens होते हैं, we'll be studying later on group 1 and group 7 in very detail हमने पढ़ना है. लेकिन जो main फर्क है between group number 7 and group number 8, वो कुछ यही है. For example, group number 7 all are diatomic. Group number 8 elements जो हैं वो monatomic है. Then group number 7 elements are colored. Group number 8 are colorless. ठीक है. Group number 8 जो noble gases हैं, for example, argon, krypton, neon, as I named over here, they are all colorless. They have no color. Also, they are all non-flammable gases at room temperature. इनको flame नहीं लग सकता. Now, why do we call them noble gases? Because the group 0 elements all have full outer shell of electrons. इनका जो outermost valence shell है, that is actually complete. And this electronic configuration is extremely stable. Elements participate in reactions to complete their outer shells by losing, gaining, or sharing electrons. The group 0 elements do not need to do this because of their full outer shells, which make them unreactive and inert. जो group 0 के elements हैं, they are noble gases. उनका outermost shell complete है. They don't have to gain electrons. They don't have to even lose electrons. Hence, they also do not perform in bonding. And when they do not perform in bonding, that is why they exist as single atoms. Noble hand, they like to remain alone, inert, unreactive because of their full outermost shell, which makes them unreactive and inert. That is why we call them group 0 elements. और ये आपका group number 8 होता है, we call them noble gases. Other than helium, which has 2 electrons, now noble gases कौन सी हैं? Group number 8, helium, neon. If you have a periodic table, you can look at the last group. Helium, neon, argon, krypton, xenon. ये सारे क्या हैं? They are all noble gases. Except helium, all others have 8 outermost electrons in their outermost shell. बाकी सारे जो आपके पास elements हैं, other than the exception of helium, they are all having 8 electrons in their outermost shell. Only helium has 2 electrons in its outer shell. The noble gases have 8 valence electrons. इनके 8 valence electrons होते हैं. That is why we call them group 8 elements. इसलिए जिनका group number है, that is also 8. They are all known as group 8 elements or also known as group 0 elements क्योंकि इनके जो outermost shell में electrons होते हैं, they are in total of 8. That is why you may see this group labeled as group number 8. So these are the electronic configurations of the noble gases. Helium के 2 होते हैं, neon का जो proton number electrons होते हैं वो 10 होते हैं. So that is why first shell में 2 हैं, second में 8 हैं. Argon का जो electrons होते हैं वो 18 होते हैं. First में 2, second में 8, third में 8 हो गए. इस तरह krypton है and then you have xenon. So this is how the periodic table looks like. और ये जो आपको बिल्कुल last group है which has been highlighted in this diagram, the last group is known as the noble gases. कौन सी हैं इसके अंदर? आपके पास helium, neon, argon, krypton, xenon. इधर तक आपको पता होना चाहिए, neon तक बात नहीं गई. तो ये आपको first 4 to 5 noble gases का idea होना चाहिए. This is known as a group 8. or what we also call as group number 0, noble gases, inert, unreactive, having complete outermost electrons. सब outermost कितने आपके पास shells में electrons हैं? 8 electrons in the outermost valence shell, except helium. Helium has 2. बाकी सबके जो outermost shell हैं, they have 8 electrons. इसीलिए वो ना ही bonding करते हैं. They do not perform any kind of bonding. And this is the end of your periodic table. I hope this was all clear. If you have any confusion, you can go through the videos again and you can ask any questions. So far, we have completed periodic table. के अंदर हमने periodic table basics की बात की थी. Periods, group, electronic configuration, deducing the electronic configurations, identifying the element in periodic table, scientific notations, classifying metals and non-metals, the difference between metals and non-metals, the difference in chemical properties, how do having in the same group of elements having the similar chemical properties, the reason why they have same chemical properties, and then we also talk about group number 8, noble gases, and this is all for periodic table.